Welcome back. You're watching Sunday edition here on KTN News. If you're just joining us, my guests are already in the studio. I have with me Professor Tumbo, governance expert, Jared Okello, a code strategist, member of parliament for Yatta, that is Francis Mongangi, and Dismas Mokua, political analyst. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this morning. All right, let's take a look very quickly at what's happening in the local newspaper dailies in terms of the political headlines. And let's start with the Standard. Secrets of the Kenyatta's wealth. Of course, this is coming. This is a story done by Alphonse Shundu, done following that a report by the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, concerning the vast wealth of the Kenyatta family, which was considered such a crucial factor in Kenya's internal democracy that it found a special report was done on it, on the Kenyatta, on Jomo Kenyatta, the day he was buried in 1978. The report saying total size of land in hectares owned by Mama Ngina Kenyatta, 115,000. It is a memo that is dated August 31st, 1978, which was made public, I think, last week. Prof, what is your take on this story?
Thank you. First and foremost, it is an interesting story from a political perspective, from an economic perspective. Clearly, what it demonstrates is that when Kenyatta ascended the leadership of Kenya, he more or less treated national assets as personal assets. So he went around getting hold of whatever he could get as a way of consolidating his economic control over whoever dared to have a different opinion. Now, that was actually the point of departure between him and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. Odinga had thought all along, and it came out in all his writings and presentations, that they were holding power in trust, all right, for the public. But Kenyatta had a different idea. His idea was that the ruling elite around the world, all right, entrenched themselves through control of natural resources. And in this context, land was the primary means of production and control. So he went about more or less recklessly acquiring land for his family's entrenchment in the political establishment. So in terms of what independence was being fought for, he placed personal interest beyond the greater public good, so that even the people who are in the Mau Mau camps were deprived of what you could call their share of the benefits of independence.
Right.
So my personal assessment of this is that it was the trendsetter for the current greed you see around of grabiosis.
The untold story of the Jomo Kenyatta's wealth. Jared, what's your take on that mix of politics and business in post-independence Kenya, and how has it shaped the politics of this country?
Well, thank you, Ben. You read that story and you realize that in the year 1963, when Kenya attained its independence, two ills perpetuated the system. Number one was ignorance. People really did not know that if you invite corruption into a system, then that was going to be the easiest way of making wealth. Number two was about ignorance. People really did not know much, and overtrusting. You remember, and this has been documented, that when the governor was departing this country, they called in Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, the father to the Prime Minister Raila Odinga, and negotiated a peaceful settlement where they wanted to entrust the trappings of power of this country to one Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. Odinga, because of over-trusting, said that we are not going to reach such a settlement before you release people like Jomo Kenyatta from prison. And he went further to also say that in the interest of brotherhood, Kenyatta should be made president of this country until a later date when I can therefore take over. What little did he know that even as president of the country then, he still was going to have powers to remove them from jail. But the element of trusting and elements of brotherhood enabled him to cede everything else for the betterment of this country and entrust the leadership to Jomo Kenyatta. Jomo Kenyatta ascended to presidency, I think, with one fundamental notion that was their time to eat. And 2 years down the line, with the sacrifices Odinga made, he fired him from government. And that was very painful. And of course, then issues that we have read that has been declassified by the CIA out of 800 documents that CIA released 10 days ago, that they traded in charcoal, which has been a fundamental issue in Somalia, and I know we will be coming to that. We talked about ivory, Chinese to date, siphoning our ivory from the African continent back to their country, and many things that the Kenyatta family has been involved in. I think we just betrayed the trust of the people in the year 1963.
Right.
We again betrayed that trust in the year 2002 when KANU's rule was sent
Came to an end.
So, we have consistently seen this. And that is why, even as we craft political arrangements heading to the next election, trust still is at the center of every little consideration.
Mheshimiwa, what do you think about this massive wealth by the Kenyatta family? And just what do you think about this?
Ben, thank you. And please, may you allow me, I make a general statement.
Feel free.
Today, you need to evaluate and see that successive leaders from independence to date, even from the day we had the new constitution and the day we started implementing the new constitution by way of having senators, governors, members of parliament, members of county assemblies, and you will realize, any Kenyan in the street, you will realize there is every connection between power, money, corruption, and all the manner of things you can say in this country. It is not about Kenyatta alone. It is about the then ruling elite. I will reframe that question differently. The politics of this country, until recently, was dominated by two families, something that we wanted to hide. We know politics is about money. Politics is about people. We cannot say it is only Kenyatta. We need to be very fair and say, Ben, if we engage into politics, especially national politics, we will expect you to fly all the way to Mombasa, Garissa, every part of this country. We have been seeing both opposition, both in government, doing the same, flying across.
But this is specific about the Kenyatta family.
In this case, I'm coming back to that.
3 trillion, the conservative value of the Kenyatta's land. That is just what has been, according to this report.
Coming back to that, if it is true, because a report is a report, if it is true, then I think we need to use it objectively to ensure going forward that will never, that kind of a thing can never happen again. Because almost 200,000 hectares. I'm not saying you cannot wake up, work hard, and have those that kind of monies, because we have seen billionaires across the continent. Some of them are professionals who use their knowledge to make money. But in this case, I think for sure something somewhere is amiss.
Let me get Dismas's take on this. Dismas, the retired President Daniel Arap Moi took power when there was a lot of resentment against the ruling class. And this report says that there's a secret analysis which shows the Kenyatta family feared a raid on the a raid on the wealthy Kenyatta family from either the Moi government or from an angry population. Does this point to the reports or claims that the Kenyattas felt indebted to retired President Daniel Arap Moi?
I think so, and not to speak in general terms. That report confirms why Kenya is wallowing in a miasma of impunity, mediocrity, and corruption. because the political leadership we have in Kenya and also the public servants in Kenya, they consider their positions in the public service as a factor of production. That's why if you go to his constituency right now, is the MCAs who 5 years ago would not afford a meal in a decent place. Right now, all of them have become millionaires. Governors today have become billionaires. That's why if you go to Wilson Airport this morning, there are so many choppers moving around. And the politicians have got a lot of resources, not because they've harnessed the factors of production, but because they've stolen from the public coffer. That's why people have to kill each other to ascend to public office. And for me, that report is a confirmation, really, that in as much as we want to make progress as a nation, we have a new constitution coming on board, we'll never ever get to the space of our contemporaries, like, say, Singapore or South Korea. Because in other nations, if you go to Germany, if you want to make money, you are told go to the private sector and harness the factors of production. The German Chancellor today, Angela Merkel, is not necessarily one of the richest people in Germany, but she's offering the nation leadership. When Barack Obama took over as the president of the US, he was not necessarily the richest man. And according to conservative estimates, by the time he left office, he was worth an equivalent of 1.2 billion Kenyan shillings only. And when you look at the American economy and the amount of money that was under his control, you begin to wonder. And I think for us, the challenge moving forward is whether or not we can actually elect leaders, not necessarily because they're flying around in choppers, but because of their intellectual infrastructure. As we approach the elections, and when you look at the August scoreboard, there are so many people who would like, for instance, to challenge Honorable Mwangangia, but because they don't have resources, because they cannot hire a chopper, because they cannot afford to give people a lot of money in terms of sitting allowance and entertainment allowance, they're not going to show up to campaign. And I think that's a tragedy of our time.
All right. Let's move on, but let's look at another story, which is closely knit with that one in the Sunday Nation, page 20. Which way KANU after Moi Mama Ngina talks? This, of course, after a meeting between retired President Daniel Moi and Mama Ngina Kenyatta last weekend, which set tongues wagging. Let me start with you, Dismas. Does this point to KANU deciding to back Uhuru's re-election bid?
Well, Gideon Moi sits in a very comfortable position because I think he's probably the only politician who can decide to work with any side of their coalition. And the two things are going to inform his decision-making process. He doesn't get along with one Mr. Raila Odinga, and he doesn't get along with the Deputy President Ruto. So if you look at the scenario one, if, for instance, NASA is able to, concretize and crystallize, and anybody outside Raila Odinga becomes the presidential candidate, then Gideon Moi would be very happy to support that coalition because his big issue is Raila Odinga. Now, the reason why he's having issues again with Jubilee is because of his issues again with the DP Ruto. You recall that not long ago there was a funeral of Mark II, and there was a bit of a commotion and disturbance. And he finds himself in a very tight position. But again, according to observers and analysts, they say whichever coalition he decides to work on, and he releases only a small percentage of his wealth, confirmed by that report, is likely to turn the election in one way.
Mheshimiwa, you're a Jubilee insider. Which way is KANU going to throw its weight?
Definitely, KANU can never go to the other side. It's confirmed. The owner of KANU has said time and again. And you look at the history. Always you don't make anything new, and I'm sure Professor will agree with me on that. Anything that we are even discussing here, most likely 60 years ago, people were discussing the same. The thing is, KANU will go Uhuru Kenyatta's way.
Right.
Yes.
We'll wait to see how that pans out. Jared, what do you think about that? And how much impact will it have, KANU, whichever side it backs, whether it's CORD or Jubilee?
Well, firstly, if you allow me, Ben, let me wrap up the previous discussion on Kenyatta's wealth before I move to this fundamental topic. Well, Mother Teresa, the renowned Nobel Peace Prize winner, once said that, we are poor because we are not sharing. So if one person can have land to the tune of 3 trillion shillings, in this country, yet many are wallowing in immense poverty, then I think that is immoral. Number two, considering that, when the British was leaving, they left large parcels of land behind, and people used their instruments of power to seize what remained for their own selfish gain. So I think as we move forward as a nation, we have to firstly know that we are not permanent on this earth, and therefore whatever we acquire should just be the one that propels you to the next phase, which is death, upon which God will come to take us home.
Since you brought it up, let me ask you this, and I'll ask you, Prof, as well. We have seen that report. It has always been an open secret how much land the Kenyatta family has. But the current politician from the Kenyatta family we have today is the president. How much can Kenyans, put him to task over that if the land is owned by the family? Well, I think this came up during the presidential debate last time.
Oh, well, it did. And he was at pains to even answer that question. Of course, again, when you have instruments of power, particularly during the time when Kenya was attaining its independence, it was easier for the president to use the office in order to legalize the documentation. And therefore, you cannot say with certainty that the land does not belong to him, because, the best way of determining who owns what is the title. And if the title is genuine, then you really have to close the shop from that point. Israelis will tell you that cash is not wealth. But if you have property with a title, then that is wealth. Because that is what you can use as collateral to even acquire loans and establish yourself moving forward. So Kenyatta family, I think they will still continue to be at pains up to the 15th generation in explaining to Kenyans how they came to that point.
Let me ask Prof the same.
Yeah.
Can President Uhuru Kenyatta say, you know what, just get these 100,000 acres, give it to Kenyans. Just let this monkey off my back. Where does it leave him as an individual politician, but as a member of the Kenyatta family?
Prof, just allow me, and I apologize. We had so many IDPs in camps, most of whom came from his backyard, and they were in difficulties throughout that period. The biggest question that arose was where to take them to in terms of land. At that time, 3 trillion shillings worth of land was still with the family. They kept quiet about it. Take it up.
Well, I think you've said part of what I wanted to say, but I think the critical element in all these discussions is that the Kenyatta family and the subsequent political players are victims or slaves, all right, of warped thinking. For you to expect Uhuru Kenyatta to detach himself from that privileged position that allows him to enjoy privileges he has not worked for, all right? He's enjoying privileges he has not worked for. Now, to expect him to disown that line of thinking and then at the same time say now, all of a sudden, he is a benefactor to all these people who they sarcastically call Ngui, Mbwa, all right? It's extremely difficult. 2, this type of thinking has been passed on from one political generation to another. For example, if you look within the political establishment, when one wants to stand for election, let's say against a governor, all right, you are told, can you raise, he has got about 1 billion shillings. Can you raise 1 billion shillings to compete with him? In other words, our mental status is that we have accepted, we're not willing to interrogate, all right, the propriety and ask people to be accountable for some historical injustices and current injustices that have been perpetuated, derived from, initial benefit. When I started talking about this issue, I said Jomo Kenyatta came to acquire Kenya as personal property. Now, this thinking, for example, if you look at, seriously speaking, in terms of political talent, when Gideon came in the limelight, he was as raw and as inept as you could get.
All right.
Now, if he didn't come from a privileged background, he would have been in the dustbin long time ago. So our problem is mental enslavement. What is required is emotional and intellectual re-engineering so that we can start a new phase of getting ourselves out of this.
Ben, you
right.
cut me short before I commented
we
on
need to-
that
we need to move
family.
on.
Ben,
Mama Ngina visited
The
Moi.
KANU issue.
Yeah,
Ben.
and I've not spoken about it.
No, we need to move on. There are a lot of issues. We can't speak about all of them.
Yes.
Let me move on to the next thing. We're coming
Ben.
back to discuss local politics. Let's finish with the newspapers first, and let's talk about, very quickly, in 30 seconds only, still in this CIA reports, just some history, and it's good for our viewers because we educate especially the younger viewers. U.S. spy agency named Mwai Kibaki, J.M. Kariuki as potential Jomo successors, and Moi's chances were dismissed as the Moi as president might be little more than a figurehead. That is what, that is how the CIA figured it out. Yet Moi ruled this country for 24 years. In just 30 seconds each, just let me know what you think about this.
You recall there was that change the constitution group which wanted to review the constitution so that then Deputy President Moi does not automatically take over. And everybody dismissed him. And he was even referred to as a passing cloud. But I think because Moi had been in the system for so long, he had kept the company of President Kenyatta, and he spent a lot of time studying him. He just played like a fool. And that's why they say never ever underrate a fool, because he's absorbing a lot of information and he can shock you. And you recall they said that this gentleman is a passing cloud. And 24 years later, they were in a state of shock.
Mashmura, what do you think about this then? The professor of politics was dismissed 30-something years ago.
Yes. I think our politics is controlled from elsewhere. That's what I would say. It is manufactured somewhere and delivered here for implementation. That's what I will definitely think.
Even today?
Even today. And look at even the report we started discussing. Why now and why a specific family? And look at where the country is. There are so many underlying things just to bring up the emotions, and during that time you execute your agenda. It's as simple as that.
Very good question. Why the CIA decided to make it public now? Jared?
Well, it is known that the first vice president of this country, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, went to school properly.
Yes.
And they thought that because of his know-how and great intelligence, he had to be shown the doors in order that a puppet could be brought into the system. People who could not ask difficult questions touching on governance. That is why they quickly settled on former President Moi. As my brother Dismas has alluded, at some point they had intended to change the laws because the president was becoming frail and he was not in very good health. So they wanted to do away with that clause that gave the vice president automatic succession. So that therefore necessitated people like Kibaki and J.M. Kariuki, as the CIA report puts it, to be very close to the president.
Would you say that
And when-
Jaramogi was a leftist politician? It was all KANU.
What I can say is that he stood for what was right for the country. And people who go into the system sometimes are there for their own selfish aggrandizement. They would want to make money, they would want to muzzle people and suppress dissenting voices. So, because again, President Kenyatta's legacy, the former president, had enshrined tribalism into the system, people therefore knew, particularly the kitchen cabinet, that whoever was then going to be poised to take over from him must be somebody from his backyard, must be somebody from his central province.
All right.
That is why the name of Kibaki and J.M. Kariuki came forward.
All right. Prof?
I want to make a couple of comments. First, I agree with Mheshimiwa about our politics being controlled from elsewhere. There is no country whose politics is not influenced externally by some force. Now, in our case, we have been a fighting ground between the leftists and the rightists. Now, that brings me to the issue you raised about Jaramogi.
Yes.
For that period, he was a leftist, all right? And what you see now in Kenya, politically, the CORD and the Jubilee are remnants of that arrangement from independence. Jaramogi represented most of the thinking that is in CORD now. And Kenyatta represents the thinking which was saying control the resources, you will control the people.
Yes.
Now, the last thing I want to say that I find extremely disturbing is the fact that even the young generations today are unwilling, all right, to rigorously interrogate, all right, the system as it works. We sort of swallow it and handle it as if it can't be changed. Now, are we waiting for some revolutionary to come and stamp a new authority? Our problem is that the young people, as long as they are getting things to eat, all right, they are completely mentally unable to interrogate the wrong things that are going on.
Right.
And if you look at them right now, irrespective of how badly CORD does or manages its projects, the CORD diehards don't want to think about the wrong things. And you look at Jubilee, irrespective of how badly Jubilee manages the country, people are running around like rabbits, supporting Jubilee as if these issues are not pertinent.
Thanks, Prof. There with your biochemical analysis of political behavior of Kenyans. Now, finally, let's look at one thing. In the next 2 days or so, Africans will know who the next chairperson of the African Union Commission will be, looking to replace South Africa's Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Amina Mohamed, the Kenyan CS for Foreign Affairs, is a leading candidate. She's facing a lot of competition from Pelonomi Venson Moitoi of Botswana. There's an Equatorian Guinea, Gapito Mbamokui. There's a Chadian, Musa Faki Mahamat, and Abdoulaye Batili from Senegal. 30 seconds only, Prof. What are Amina Mohamed's chances?
I'm not sure what her chances are. What I know is that she's the search to get Amina Mohamed to chair the African Union is a continuation of that ICC agenda.
The Kenyan agenda.
The Kenya agenda.
All right.
Yes.
AU hasn't been able to name a chair on several occasions. What are the chances of Amina Mohamed?
Well, you know, the election that is slated for tomorrow is a follow-up on a botched election last year in Gambia, where they could not get a substantive chairperson. And, you know, Jinping and Dlamini couldn't raise the 2/3 majority, which is a requirement in getting the AUC chair, the African Union Commission's chair. Amina Mohamed, I do know that the government, the Jubilee government, has tried to mobilize so aggressively, both locally and abroad, so that they can take that privilege. Let me join my brother, Professor Tumbo, in saying that, you know, Kenya's issue with ICC is not yet over. We have 4 warrants of arrest against people who are perceived to have interfered with witnesses here. If you remember last year, a verdict was passed to the former DR Congo's former vice chair, Jean-Pierre Bemba, that, you know, he interfered with witnesses and therefore got 18 years to be in jail. We already have warrants of arrest on people who interfered with the ICC process here. So we are not so sure whether the Deputy President William Ruto and President Uhuru Kenyatta are completely out of the hook.
All right.
We do know the participatory role that was played and still continues to be played by African Union as so far as dismembering itself from the Assembly of State Parties.
Mheshimiwa, what are Amina Mohamed's chances and what would be her impact if elected as chair?
When so far, as Prof says, I'm not fully aware of her chances, but I would wish she gets it. Remember, African continent, our only voice is through African Union. With the chair coming from Kenya, doesn't matter who that person is, it means the center of communication out of African continent is through that commission. Hence, more engagements at the global arena, which I think is a good thing for the country
right.
and even the region. Remembering that we have instability in some countries within the region. Through that position, we will be in a position to influence a lot of what happens, not only in this country, but even within the region.
Dismas, what do you think?
When you look at the Africa Union, I think it's demonstrated a lot of success in failure to resolve conflicts in Africa. So even one wonders why Amina Mohamed would be interested in that position. Like, for instance, the latest case of the Gambia, Africa Union never spoke. They never said anything. It was actually ECOWAS which took a leadership role and brought in the UN and Africa Union much later on in the day for them to kick out the dictator in Gambia. That's number one. Number two, I don't know what Ambassador Amina Mohamed has done in the diplomatic service and today as the CS for International Affairs to demonstrate to the entire world, especially the African Union leadership, that he can take the African Union to the next level. Because even when you look at Kenya, we are talking about the issue of Somalia, we are talking about Burundi. You know, there's a crisis everywhere. And she's not given any leadership position. She doesn't have any solid achievements. Like, if you read Things Fall Apart, Okonkwo had a track record of success. You could actually say, this is what Okonkwo has done. I don't know what Ambassador Amina Mohamed has done so as to inspire the people that she's going to be an important and powerful leader in Africa. And then the issue of ICC cannot be taken away again from Amina Mohamed. For the longest time, since we started the administration of Jubilee, Amina Mohamed was not serving at a ministry along Arambe Avenue. All the time she was jumping from one seat to the other. And for me, I would imagine that would be the continuation.
All right.
But again, for those African leaders, it's an entirely different ballgame because they've watched the behavior on CNN, Al Jazeera, doing those kind of interviews. So I'm not sure whether that's the kind of leadership they'd want. But again, we are told there are so many interests that are going to influence that election tomorrow.
Right.
Understand that delegations in truckloads in Addis Ababa, and there's a lot of cash changing hands. And
Lobbying
I think
and all
at the end of the
all
day,
right. All right. Let's. Yes.
Ben, I think, you know, for quite a while I've been watching what this man's arguments are. And sometimes are very good, and sometimes I don't understand him. Because Ben, we need this country, we need to get, since this administration came to power, it's only fair we get to know how much do we have in terms of foreign investments in this country.
All right, all right. Let's do this.
Also, the last one, the last bit of Amina as CS of Foreign Affairs and International Trend. How many international conferences have we had? How do they come?
At the
Is
end,
it not
what,
through
this is
the
what I'm
ministry?
going to do. This is what I'm going to do. At the end of this show, I'll give the two of you 1 minute to battle that out. That's where we leave it. You're watching Sunday edition. That's where we leave it for this segment of Political Pages, taking a look at the political headlines. When we return after the quick commercial break, we'll take a look at the race for numbers, the second week, going into the third week of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission's mass voter registration. Remember, the second and final phase. We'll also take a look at the state of the race, what is happening politically in the run-up to the August general election. It's slightly less than 7 months to the polls. Stay with us here on Sunday edition. We're back shortly.